Welcome back. I'm Barry Craig. How are Dracula, Dr. Zhivago, and Governor Matt Bevin's pension bill alike? They all run to 500 pages. My guest today has read Dr. Zhivago and the governor's pension bill. He is Marshall Ward, president of the Calloway County Retired Teachers Association, and he's here today, hopefully, to shed more light than heat on this issue, which is controversial, to say the least. Marshall, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Barry. Glad to be here.
We have 30 minutes. Is that enough time to kind of go over this?
Well, let's see. It's taken us about 30 years to get here, I guess. 30 minutes might be okay. So let's get started.
All right. Let's begin with, obviously, the controversy of this bill is huge. It is. I've been looking at Kentucky politics for 40 years, and this is easily the most controversial bill to come down the pike. Begin with, and I think there's a lot of confusion as to what's in it. Begin with kind of an overview of what this bill would do, who it would affect, and how it would affect them.
Well, the biggest problem, I guess, that we see as retired teachers is the defined benefits program, which is where everybody puts into a pool of money. It's a prepaid deal, will be phased out, and a defined contribution program will be put in its place for people's retirement. Now, the big difference is the defined benefits program is a guaranteed amount of money once you retire, and in Kentucky it's a 27-year deal. And the defined contribution it's pretty much like a 401k type investment where you manage your own money and you put it in that account and you're at the mercy of the markets. The defined benefits program, though, in a sense, has a huge, I guess, positive side because you have professional managers taking care of that money. And in the last few years, the defined benefits program, at least for the teacher pot, and you do know there are like 8 different pots, which makes it very difficult to even talk about, but I'm here to talk about the teacher pot, has had a very good return on investment, on average of about 8% in the last many years. And so the defined contribution piece, however, you'd be at the mercy of the market and you'd have to manage your own money. West Virginia has gone to the defined contribution and then gone back to defined benefits. Ohio, Oklahoma, Alaska. So Kentucky's, as I think you probably have mentioned here, Kentucky's usually 20 years behind other folks.
And Mark Twain supposedly said that.
Yes,
yeah,
he did.
Yeah.
I think he probably did. And others, obviously, after him.
Right.
So our worry is that the folks in Frankfurt haven't done their homework on how this thing has been done by others and has failed. So we're keeping our fingers crossed on 2 fronts, that the legislators will see the light and not push for the 401k / what they would call 401A, which is for public employees, and pay the mortgage payment for the defined benefit program for the next 20 years. Because as most people know, that the monies have not been put in for the last 10 or so years, which is why we're here. So the legislators have, we believe, a fiduciary responsibility to make the defined benefits program whole. Unfortunately, the governor's bill doesn't do that. It's trying to phase that out and put new teachers into the defined contribution program, which I just said is extraordinarily risky for them in terms of building them enough money to be able to retire, which we believe can't be done on a teacher's salary.
The political aspects of this are fascinating. The governor wants to call a special session. He says he has the votes to pass it. Others say he does not. Now, I did about 2 weeks ago overhear a Republican state senator say that there were at least 30 Republicans in the House who opposed this. You put that with the 36 Democrats, that's 66. That's a pretty big defeat. Now, the other part that I'm hearing from people, the caveat, if you will, is that Bevin tends to be, shall we say, single-minded, and he may try to ram this through anyway. Now, time is running out. Now, I have talked to lawmakers, I know you have too, and they're telling me there's no way they can do this before the end of the year. And of course, the legislature goes into session early January anyway. So what are you hearing from, your lawmaker is Kenneth Imes?
Yeah, we have Kenny Imes in the Murray Calloway area, as
so
well
what
as
are you
Trigg
hearing
County.
from him?
Well, Kenny Imes, I think, and also Stan Humphreys, our senator, they do not like this 401A idea. They know, and many of them have educators in their own families, this whole area because of Murray State and Western Kentucky Tech, lots of teachers out there, or people who are related to teachers. And what they've discovered is that there's, as I said before, there's really no way to put enough money away in a market-driven account so you can retire in comfort and with some sustainability. Both of them have said out loud in town forums I've attended, they don't like the 401k idea, or what they would call 401A. So I guess we're going to have to see, and of course the House is caucused this week. The Senate is actually caucusing as we speak as to how to change the governor's plan to fit what most people would agree to, which I'm hoping, and we're hoping like heck, and Kenny kind of has given us, not assurances because he can't, he's only one vote, that this defined benefits program, which we've always had, needs to be sustained and beefed up so that 20 years from now it will be in good shape. And I think that's easy to do. You just have to pay the bill, which we haven't been doing for the last 10 years.
You touched on a point about the number of teachers in this area. In Kentucky, as you know, in a lot of rural counties, the largest employer is the public school system.
Absolutely.
And you start adding up the numbers. There are 120 counties. There are also obviously independent districts in Kentucky. You add those in there, you add couples, you add families, you add friends. You're talking a huge block of voters. And these town hall meetings, some have been very rambunctious.
Absolutely.
There is one on YouTube of a woman in Barberville over in Knox County, and she really gave these lawmakers what for. And you're seeing a lot of emotion involved in this issue. So it's a very potent issue. And but again, I don't make predictions on politics or sporting events because if I did, I'd be broke. But it's going to be fascinating to see how this plays out. But it's a simple matter of time. I don't see how they could have a special session between now and January, but probably as soon as I say that, tomorrow or the next day, they'll call a special session. But everything I'm hearing, and you're hearing too, in other words, is it doesn't look likely.
I think a lot of this also is we put the cart before the horse. I heard Kenny Imes and Stan Humphreys say both that tax reform should have been job one, and then when we kind of tighten up some of these giveaways, if you will, in the state of Kentucky, which I think some actuarialists have decided that we bring in about the same amount of money in taxes as we give away. If we tighten up loopholes on the movie business, horse business, tombstone exceptions and things of that sort, that we might be able to bring in the kinds of dollars to make these pension plans whole without having to do too much monkeying around with the markets and things of that sort. And then the second thing that people need to know is that if you freeze, let's say, cost of living increases for current retirees, that will have a multiplier effect in a negative fashion for these communities like in Hickman County or Fulton County, where teachers won't be able to spend the same kind of money that are being that are retired. So the multiplier effect will impact the economies, and so this becomes a very strong economic issue, not just for teachers or for firemen or policemen or those folks, but for everybody in the community. The mom and pop shops will lose some business, and people need to take a look at that too.
I think another factor in this too is that when I was growing up, and probably you too, people said, well, if you go to work for the government in some capacity, you won't make a lot of money, but the benefits are great. Teachers are not exactly the highest paid folks out there.
Nope.
But again, you talked about you can retire in 27 years. If you, let's say right out of college, you're 22, 23 years old, you're still pretty young to retire, you've got these good benefits. So my question is, if this were to go through, how could we attract people to the teaching profession?
That's a great question. I'll just give you my own personal story. I remember out of college, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I'd applied to law school. I was accepted at Memphis State, and I decided that's not what I wanted to do. My father was very concerned I wasn't going to do a real job. I was just going to go out there monkeying around doing fun things as a young 20-something-year-old. So he suggested that I get a teaching certificate, and I took a look at that, and I said, okay, I can work at doing something I enjoy, which was history. I played soccer, so I was going to coach some soccer, and I took a look. I didn't really think about the money part, but I did know that you had some time off in the summer, unpaid. I was going to be able to deal with that, and that at the end of the line, I was going to have a decent pension. So I did factor that into my decision making on whether or not to do something in the private sector versus public sector, and I'm very glad I did. I did it for 37 years, and I'm still kind of monkeying around with it as a permanent sub in a couple of locations, which I still enjoy that. But I think a lot of folks are going to make a different decision. And one of the things they have found in places like Alaska, Oklahoma, and West Virginia, when they take away this defined benefit program, they end up having a teacher shortage. And that costs the taxpayers money too. I think in Alaska, they figured the average replacement cost as teachers leave and they have to replace them is about $20,000 per person. So if you add that up over time, that's a lot of money that local school districts and even the states have to put up because of a bad decision on a pension program. And so it's going to be a very expensive proposition and unfortunately a very expensive learning curve for people in Kentucky when we have these teacher shortages, which we already have in some areas, like special ed and math and some of the sciences. So you compound that with people not entering the profession, you're going to have a big problem on your hands.
These town halls, and they're being held across the state, I think a lot of people go think, well, what should I ask? What are the good questions? So if you've got a town hall coming up in your area and you want to go, what are some questions that people ought to be asking these lawmakers?
Well, I think the lawmakers have to be able to, now here's the catch, and I think this is something that needs to be mentioned. A lot of these lawmakers in the House are new. So they don't want to really have any personal responsibility as to how this thing happened. So they're just going to kick the can down the road and say, we weren't in charge during that moment, so we're going to just do what's best for the state of Kentucky right now.
I've heard that. So.
Well,
let me ask you something too real quick.
Go ahead.
How many do you think have actually read this bill from cover to cover?
Very few. I have no idea.
Yeah.
500 pages, 500 pages. We have a guy in our group at Calloway, a retired finance professor, Larry Guin, who read it and has basically schooled us on some things in there. And I wish I could take him on the road. As a matter of fact, one of your friends, Ken Wolf, has an RV. I said, Ken, we need to take Larry, load him up in the RV and go to town in Kentucky and just explain to them what all this stuff means in terms of long-term negative effects, whether it's the economy of a small community in Hickman County or whether it's people in Barberville who will have less money to spend because many of those folks are teachers or retired teachers and have that's the biggest employer in town. A lot of people aren't paying attention to that piece of it. And Larry has a great way of, and I wish he could be here today, Larry has a good way to unpack a lot of this stuff. So the question I would ask, I think, as John Q. taxpayer, would be 10 years down the road, is this going to be a big boondoggle where you're going to have to raise taxes across the state to pay for all this? And a lot of people worry about tax bills. And I understand that. I'm a taxpayer. So it's interesting how that is not being answered. How is this going to impact Kentucky 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road? And they don't have answers for that usually. It's just right now, and this is an election cycle, 2018. And so maybe they're trying to say things that will placate some of the taxpayers or their big donors. And by the way, I think you know that this is really nationwide a money grab because this is the only cash cow left, pensions, for the private sector to get their hands on. And hedge fund folks out and about are licking their chops if Kentucky goes this 401k. They're going to get huge commissions, and a lot of the money that should have been going into these retirement accounts will end up on Wall Street.
And you know, in Kentucky too, how long have you been in Kentucky?
Since 1998.
Well, back when I was a slip of a lad a long time ago, Kentucky was ranked, I believe, 49th in expenditure on education. We used to always say, thank God for Mississippi, they're 50th. Well, Kentucky now, I believe, has sort of got up in, we're kind of in the middle now.
I want to say the middle 20s.
We've done a lot better. And things are looking up for education. And then this thing comes along. And that's kind of a monkey wrench in the works on this. Has that aspect been looked at? The fact that we had made these improvements, that we're now kind of in the Midland, which is not as good as the top, but it's a whole lot better than 49th.
All right, one of the reasons my wife and I relocated to Kentucky was CARA, which was passed in 1990. Now, there were a lot of flaws with CARA, but it was a comprehensive an education reform act for Kentucky. A lot of states, and I was in South Carolina at that time, a lot of states looked at CARA as a model for what they needed to do to improve funding, improve equity, improve whatever you were trying to accomplish, whether it was academic achievement, building programs to make sure you had a good, safe place for kids to go. Kentucky has actually been on the forefront in a variety of areas. Exit exams that are being used as accountability pieces are important, and of course that costs some money. I think it's very important that Kentucky continue and don't live in the rearview mirror, though, because a lot of these states are wanting to go back to something they had in the 60s, 70s, or 80s, which wasn't adequate, but it was cheaper. We can't worry about that. We have to look at education as an investment and not as just an expenditure.
Another thing, too, and I've lived in Kentucky all my life, there was almost this culture in Kentucky, and it goes back to the pioneer days, that book learning is not as important as being able to shoot a rifle or skin a deer, and they're not mutually exclusive, because I used to tell my students that Daniel Boone carried the plays of William Shakespeare with him, and when he was out in the boonies he would read this. But there's this culture in Kentucky that has never valued education. There is a bumper sticker, I know you've seen it, is "My kid can beat up your honor student." Now that's funny, I know, but it is sort of indicative of the idea that higher education is not that important. It's a real cultural thing here.
All right, here's what one of the first things I saw when I went out in Calloway County. I was in the Leadership Murray program when I first moved in, the class of 2000. We went out and about. We had the Ag Day. And we went out to a farm that had the beautiful new combine and the tractors and the whole thing. And what I noticed inside the cab was a computer. So we can marry the two. We can do high tech, we can do traditional economies in Kentucky. And I think Kentucky is a great place for that to be taking place, because it's a great agricultural community, and also with universities and the way our educational system has come forward, we can marry education and tradition and make Kentucky one of the best places to live in the United States. And I think that's a very important piece of the puzzle. And you're exactly right. Traditionally, you've got to be able to do those kinds of things that Granddad did, and that is tradition. But we can apply the computer technology to bring ourselves back into the 21st century.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking that's a good thing. And the only way to do it is through education.
Yeah, yeah. Another thing, too, is the anxiety that this pension issue has caused. I do know of teachers who retired earlier than they wanted to because of this situation. I know one in particular, I won't call any names, but as soon as Matt Bevin was elected, she became very concerned about this, went to Frankfurt to the teacher retirement headquarters, if that's what you call it. They couldn't give her any answers, obviously, and so this person retired much earlier than she normally would, loved teaching, wanted to still be teaching, and she was not alone in this. And a lot of people are heading for the exits because I guess the greatest fear is the unknown. And so basically what this teacher, and that's my wife, by the way, if you hadn't guessed, the idea of, well, I love teaching, I want to still teach, but am I gambling my future away? And I would imagine there are a lot of teachers, not just teachers, but other public employees who are in this same boat, that this needs to be resolved. So teachers,
teachers, policemen, firemen, state workers, all are in the same anxious realm. And to give you an example of a teacher that I know, not my wife, but a very well-respected Murray High teacher, she's looking at retiring much sooner than she would normally do this. And here's the issue, I guess, for many of these folks on that cusp of retirement. After 27 years, you're going to be given a little window to stay in the benefit program currently. But after that, in 3-4 years, if this were to pass in 2018, they're going to have to put their retirement in that 401A program. And that's something that they believe is a hazardous thing for their retirement piece. But you're right. A lot of people are going to retire. That's going to compound the teacher shortage that I talked about earlier. And people are going to have to figure out what they're going to do. And on the front end and on the back end, if you lose a lot of people, it's going to create huge problems for small school districts out in these rural areas in particular. Who are they going to attract to come and teach in those schools in Hickman County or Barberville? You may not have the same problem in Louisville or Lexington or even maybe Murray or Bowling Green because of the university systems and that kind of thing. But the areas that need that the most are going to be the ones who suffer the most.
Mm-hmm. Are students, are they aware of this, high school students, college students?
I think they are aware that there's an issue of pensions for teachers, but I don't think they really are focused in, and probably the reason for that is mom and dad. They're too busy, and a lot of this has kind of gone out there into the world, and educators pick up on it, of course. But students may not understand, and moms and dads may need to be paying more attention because this impacts students as much as anything else. Because if you have subs come in and out of your building because you have a teacher shortage, the kids are going to be the ones who suffer. Not that the subs won't try to do a good job,
right,
but the kids are not going to get that continuity, that 15, 20-year English teacher who does the good job and teaches them how to read and write, or that math teacher or whatever. Those folks will be gone.
I'm wondering if we're seeing, maybe too early to see, if there's a decline in students going into teacher education programs.
I think there is. I don't know the numbers. I worked with student teachers at Murray State the first year out when I retired in 2015, and I did notice the room wasn't full when we all met to get ready to go do our teaching, practice teaching stuff. So I think that would be something to look at for sure. And Murray State having a wonderful teacher preparation program would be a good place to look to see what's happening with that.
And I have seen articles about the number of teachers and public employees who are retiring in anticipation of this. So if you could gaze into your crystal ball, I don't do that. Being a historian, I look backwards. It's much easier.
Well, you know, that's why I use the rearview mirror as an analogy there.
Exactly. What do you think the upshot of this will be?
Well, obviously, the pension program is a very big issue in terms of its sustainability, because we haven't done our job with putting monies in there for the last 10 or so years. I think this is going to help us refocus on the value of education in our state. It's going to help us refocus on the professional teacher and how we need to take care of that person who made the choice to perhaps take a pay cut up front in order to work hard for 25, 30, 35 or 40 years and then have a comfortable retirement at the end. So we can reward that person for being dedicated and giving, if you will, to the social fabric to make sure our kids get a good education. There's really, I look at teachers as the first responder, the first responders. And God bless the police and the fire and those guys who put their lives on the line to do that. But on a daily basis, teacher is that first responder. So perhaps it'll put a focus on the value of teaching, the value of teachers, the value of education generally in the state of Kentucky, which interestingly since 1990 has been on the front burner. Most recently though has been kind of pushed back a little bit. So I hope that's going to be what occurs. Having the discussion, the dialogue is always important. We just have to convince the folks in Frankfort who are representing our values do the right thing by teachers and the teaching profession, and for policemen and firemen and the other folks with these pension programs.
Of course, you mentioned first responders. Who teaches the first responders?
There you go.
And that's this. So these town hall meetings, what are other ways? You know, people say it doesn't do any good to write a letter. Well, of course, nowadays people don't write letters. It's in emails or calling legislators. If somebody said to you, yeah, I know, but it doesn't do any good, what do you tell them?
I think what I've done personally is I've developed a relationship with my legislator, Kenny Imes, more than Stan Humphreys. And
that's easier to do in a state legislature because your lawmaker maybe goes to church with you or is in a club with you or lives in your neighborhood. You can actually talk to them face to face.
And to me, that's the better way to go. Now, here's what they don't like. They don't like form letters.
Right.
They don't like form emails.
Right.
Where you've gotten offline by some group that says send this and do the deal. What we've done in our organization, which is the Calloway County Retired Teachers Organization, we've emphasized writing a handwritten note. And a nice little short, sweet, hey, have you thought about this? Or thank you for this. And sending that in. And we've gotten some good feedback from Kenny, who's our guy, that he appreciates that and he reads those. The massive pre-canned emails, he doesn't really read.
Now, I've also heard from more than one lawmaker that if you phone the message center and they put them in their box, if they get a stack of messages, they'll pay attention to that.
And that's a good point, too. They like those little pink slips that they get.
And there's a toll-free number, which you can find online to do that.
Right.
Again, groups like yours, any advice to other retired teachers groups? How do you lobby this?
It's a team sport, and what we've done is we partnered with the KEA, we partnered with Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, we partnered with some of the nonprofits also in the area that are under the United Way emblem, because all this is going to impact our economies. We've also partnered with current teachers. I put in a program to do an associate membership, so I've sent out notices to people in the Calloway and Murray systems to join our organization before they retire. So we've got folks who have interest in, obviously, the retirement system because they're getting ready to retire, maybe in 10 years or whatever. And we've gotten, oh gosh, I bet I've gotten 20 or 25 people join our group who are not retired yet. So we've got to be creative, we've got to communicate, we've got to kind of partner. We've partnered with the Chamber of Commerce in Murray. And I don't know if you know this, but the Murray Chamber of Commerce came out against the plan, which was contrary to what the State Chamber of Commerce did for Kentucky. So that was good. And we obviously are partnering with Murray State and some other folks who have good resources, like Larry Guin, for example, our retired finance guy. He's a former Murray State guy. So it's a constant team sport effort. Having a great community is a team sport. It's not one person, it's not one group, it's not one political party, it's everybody. And I hate to use this old adage, and you'll probably laugh at me when I say this, but it takes a village.
Oh, it does.
And that's just all there is to it.
And what's our state motto? United we stand, divided we fall.
Absolutely.
That's true. In the about a minute and a half we have left, how can folks contact you?
Well, my name is Marshall Ward. It's the Calloway County Retired Teachers Association, and we have a website, which is, I hate to do this, but it's called the Calloway County Retired Teachers Association. And we have made a very great attempt at keeping people up to date on what's happening in Frankfort. We're actually going to be having, I wish I could invite the whole area to come, but Tim Abrams, Bob Wagner, who are the executive director and director, I guess the past and present director of the Kentucky Retired Teachers Group, they're coming December the 11th to the Women's Club in Murray, and they're going to give us kind of an update. And it's an extraordinarily timely thing because we may actually have 2.0 out there from both the Senate and the House by December the 11th.
Now, is that open to the public?
No, I wish it was. It's going to be probably about 100 retired teachers who will come and listen. But we're inviting the press. And hopefully if they check our website out, they can see what Tim and Bob have to say about part 2 of this thing. So
we're out of time.
Oh, well, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity.
We enjoy this, and maybe we can, when strong arm Mr. Gwynn to
we need Larry.
Program.
Larry would be able to unpack lots of stuff.
That'd be a good follow-up.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm Barry Craig. My guest today was Marshall Ward. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.